everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Hi, Gary. Thank you so much for coming to join us today as we open A Usable Past, Reflections on the Nation and its Inheritance. It's a gorgeous day outside, so I really appreciate that you've come here to take in some nutritious goodness with precisely half of the artists from this exhibition. What I'm going to do is just sort of set it up, and then I will ask each of our panel artists to briefly introduce themselves and maybe just gesture to their work so you have a sense of context about who belongs to what. We opened this exhibition last night, and you are among the first people, aside from last night's attendees, to see this show. It features work by 12 artists who reckon with America's layered histories. From family lineages and ancestral myths to rooted values, the works probe the ways the nation's past continues to shape these artists and their experience of the present. This kind of kicks off a season in this city looking at 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And that was I don't want to use the word inspiration, but the curatorial prompt for this exhibition in a time of severe reckoning, I think, with this country and what it is to live and work and be artists and affiliated with an arts community in this time. So I'm going to hand this to you, Terry, and you're going to hand this to James. And Terry, you're going to kick us off with the introductions.
Terry Holzgreen, my piece is directly behind you, up against the window there. Tall piece. I'm from Los Angeles. Did the art residency here in 2023. So the piece got made during that residency and is in the collection of the museum here. And it's called Because Democracy Still Got Legs. And so 2023, we're just approaching the next election between Biden and Trump. So there was a lot of energy in my body about that.
Ooh, public speaking, huh? Not like the class we took in school. James Raul, my piece is right over here. And born in Los Angeles, moved to the Bay, so I claim the Bay. Los Angeles, born in San Francisco, approved. I'm just happy to be here. Amazing artists on this panel, so I'm looking forward to the discussion.
I'm David J. Wilson. I'm based out of New York City, grew up in New Orleans. This is the piece I have in the show right here. It was made in 2021 during the time when Ribeiro passed, and I was really focused on the architecture of spaces of traditional systems, court systems, prison systems. So a lot of the imagery was taken from that was what was happening during that time, and the justice was forced on to scope by.
Hi everybody, I'm Raul, Lara, and I have two pieces in the show. I have the Monstera on the chain, and then the Cactus weapon force. I'm based in Queens, New York, born in Mexico, and then kind of moved around Texas and all over places. But yeah, I made these pieces with the shared backyard between the U.S. and Mexico in mind, and my choices of materials and kind of like stage of, wilt in that piece, kind of like thinking about like, aid and support and sort of like time as a sort of like pressing force.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Winkle. I live in Tennessee, but I am originally from Oklahoma. I'm a citizen of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. And so I have two pieces in the exhibition. One was created when I did the residency at the time. It was called the International Turning Exchange Residency. It's a small piece that hangs on the wall next to Raul's. And then I have another piece that's behind the boat, that is a house form with a net met beneath it with small houses. So I was thinking of the power of home inheritance, small homes capable of holding memory, tradition, inheritance, so many things. And so I'm grateful to have this opportunity and to exhibit alongside and meet each of these talented artists.
Hello, my name is Ribeiro. This is my piece, I'm Away from Home 10. And I was born in Philly. I don't know much about Philly. I grew up in Ghana since I was 1, so that's like, and I'm based in Atlanta, second half of my life in Atlanta, and I've done a lot of back and forth between Ghana and the States, so a lot of my work is dealing with bridging a lot of the similarities I see in the cultures and highlighting moments where we hide in plain sight, but also share a lot of knowledge with each other.
Thank you so much. I can't express to you how much I appreciate all of you for responding to this prompt, and then doing so with the incredible body of work that you put together. And it feels remarkable to be sitting here in this space around this work, which expresses so many complex narratives and richness and an incredible love and passion for the material of wood. So first, it seems appropriate to start off a conversation by just thanking you all for doing that, and making our world incredibly rich and deep and thoughtful. So I wanted to kick this off with some discussion about American society and this concept of a useful past, which is a kind of literary criticism term that comes from almost 100 years ago at a time of worldwide chaos. And this concept that you can create a history based on your selective curation, for lack of a better word, of events as you see them. So with that in mind, how might you respond to this question of where we are right now?
I need to think on that one for a second. Anybody ready to go? I might have to say all of that again. That was a pact.
Sure. Well, I'll delve into that a little bit. One of the curatorial ideas here was to look nationally. So geographically, we have a breadth of people. They're not all from the East Coast. Some of you are in the South. Some of you are from the West Coast. Some of you are from the interior. And then a great number of you are binational, and as am I. And I think that has a lot to do with the work that artists are creating together. And James is in it.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, topic, like all the topics, right? And the prompts. I entered during COVID. Ooh, remember COVID? Still here. I read a lot. And one of the books I read was by Dr. Hardy. He's in Drexel. And it was a concept of all my readings during that time. I found out 2 things about myself. One, I had morality anger. Right? Okay. And then I read Dr. Hardy's book, and it was a 1-2 punch. Okay, the concept of psychological homelessness. And that's what sprouted my piece, because this piece is dance, but it's a humbling experience to learn new materials. But it's also this leap of faith, and it's very scary, right? But you have to deal with it, right? And so, entry point was, until the Colita, the last slave ship to come to the Americas, and all that whole history. And I'm not a historian, but it was something that I wanted to honor this person who possibly was dealing with psychological homelessness. Because it was right, this was the last trip over here, right? And I put that energy, or I felt that energy from this log. It was displaced. But I knew that there was history there. And that's when my research started. So to be placed here and to use a language that genetically, that it's not my first language, right? I'm at a point right now, I'm going through reappointment within academia, writing my research statement, right? And my service to the community and the institution, right? And also my teaching statement. But it's what I gained was, or my argument, is that I possibly could have spoken what's embedded in my body 4 other languages, and I have to translate all of that residue into a language that's foreign to me, even though I was born in this nation, in this land, right? And this is where the materials, wood, blood, hair, spit, all of these things come to me. That's the best way I can answer that question.
Follow up. I guess I'll just start to talk about what I understood in general more. And for me, it's deeply personal. As a young person, I was incarcerated, and so I sort of came up through that system. And when I got out, I didn't have a family support system, so I took trade jobs, and I learned craft through the need to be able to create capital to be able to survive. And later on in life, when I ended up going to art school, which I started much later than most people do, as an adult, and then on to grad school, I kind of was, all of that was put aside. I was taught that none of that was important, and it was all about the concept, and it was all about theory and how we think about this. And at some point, many years after grad school, I decided that that was bullshit. And that I wanted to revisit what craft meant as a politic, as different forms of labor that can communicate to criticizing the capital that created those systems that I was sort of put through. And I really started to look into theories of like capital and power. And so I was reading a lot of the normal stuff like Foucault, and then I ran across this text by Jean Baudrillard at the very end of his life, when he wasn't writing, but he was doing these talking tours. And there was a transcript of one talk that he gave at a panel discussion. And he talked about the agony of power, and this idea that at the root of all systems is the desire for power. And for me, I had never thought about it like that. I had never pursued power in any kind of capacity. It was something that was foreign to me. And so when I started to think about, these systems are all about people who are pursuing this in control of everything. When we look back to how the Constitution was formed, and we're talking about all created equal, we're talking about all rich white men being created equal. And anybody who is poor, anybody who is of a different ethnicity, anybody who is of a different race is not included in these sort of designs. And so I started to think about how that could, work abstractly into woodworking, and this idea of the body, and this idea of incarceration, and this idea of the sort of like bureaucratical spaces that dictate how people are put into these systems. So judges' offices, lawyers' offices, these interstitial spaces that sort of exist where people are just detained but not defined in any way, whether they're guilty or innocent. And the nuances of these aesthetic objects that existed in these spaces, from my experience, I tried to create a new universe of them. Because for this idea of the digital, this idea of the speed of information, this idea of how fast we move on any given day, is so strange to the concept of like who we are as human beings. And I really wanted to slow it down, and I really wanted to open up and create visual elements that show us things that we don't normally see. Like, people are incarcerated, we don't see images of that. People are put in holding cells, we don't see images of that. So I wanted to create things that are a combination of all these like strange aesthetic elements to create a sort of complicated engagement where something looks beautiful, it draws you in, you understand that there had to be some amount of skill and craft involved in that. But when you start to look at it, it starts to push back at you, and it's making you question why these elements are existing together with one another, to start to reflect on each of our own contingencies within these systems that exist, but also, you know, on a personal level, like why am I drawn to this, and what repels me about this, that kind of juxtaposition between these different things.
That's beautiful to hear. Thank you, piece definitely. When I first saw it, it was this immediate attraction, and you should really get feeling the heaviness and like the complexity of it all. And I think there's something in your piece and in this exhibition that really moved me, that everyone has their own ways of encapsulating these narratives into this like symbols. Like for me, wood as a medium, it's a beautiful and strange material because it had to be, it had to live a life to become this. It had to like grow a certain amount and like, you know, be surrounded by people, surrounded by history, surrounded by environments that made it become eventually what's in this room. There's like an aspect in my work about that, like where I get the wood from, the kind of like shape I give it. I think for me, the conversation with my work is a bit of like a comedy and tragedy. I think there's like a lot of room in there for like thinking about like one lived experience. Yeah, I think also for me, like something with my work that's not strange to me, but part of like the idea of the work is that I make it modular because I'm unable to travel out of the country because of my legal status. So I make work that can travel other places for me, and I make it really easy to assemble because the other side needs to be able to put it back together. So there's something there for me too, that like, you know, these works or like my work, it's like not just, this is not the ending point, it's like this ongoing conversation. Yeah, I think also like these two pieces that are in the exhibition at a limbo state, you know, like a wilting plant. It's like not fully dead, but it's not fully alive, and like you can't tell which direction it's going. So I feel like, you know, tying it to like the histories and like the present day in this country, you know, we're known for like moving backwards, or of course, with some other policy, but yeah, we're here and we have to do with it today. And then with the walking horse, you know, thinking like similar to the idea that you were talking about of like the attraction and pushback. I think there's something with this piece too, that within the craftsmanship, it like kind of quickly like puts you in a position of like engagement, but then you start digging deeper into it and see, you know, the stories start opening up. And I use the cactus with my work often because I see it as this kind of like symbol of the shared backyard between the US and Mexico in the desert. And while it could be a beautiful story and place, it also is like a weapon of, you know, destruction and death, and used against the same people that live there. So it's like a complicated space, but it's also a beautiful one. So it's kind of like some of the symbols of my work. Sorry.
No. I don't know that I have a response to this specific prompt, but I can just talk. Okay. So, being from Oklahoma, I mean, I think we all know Oklahoma is complicated as well, you know, in the relocation of a lot of tribes, and the Seminoles originally coming from the Florida and Georgia area, and now in Oklahoma, so there's two different nations. And my grandmother died in March, and so I went home for that, and she chose to be buried in Seminole, and so I went home to Seminole and saw this map with like land allotments and saying, you know, my mom's side of the family is Native, and my grandfather's name was John Goat, and so like seeing the family allotment, you know, with his name on it, and just, I don't know, like just thinking about land and material of wood being able to hold all of these memories and experience and lineage, and sorry, I'm not expecting this. Oh.
There's so many things all y'all are saying that it's like it's just hitting home. But I think where I started coming into this body of work, I started working on this when I was in grad school, just north of Detroit, Cranbrook. I was in the printmaking department, and this is after some time I was in Ghana and just trying to find a way to consolidate my practice. My practice shifts a lot. I do a lot of painting, drawing, sculpture, printmaking, and I was in my MFA for printmaking. And moving back to the States, it was just a reminder of a lot of the things that I had to deal with here, being geographically here. And I'm spending the same amount of money that all these people are spending at this grad school, but somehow when I do a litho, 15 minutes of my crit time is wasted talking about German quarries when I'm specifically talking about this specific history. And people want to highlight how these people are really like a specific group of people might be responsible for all this history when I know that there are other histories that are not celebrated, and that's where I'm trying to focus on. So, through trial and error, well, first I went to the DIA and I saw a Glenn Ligon piece called To Disembark, and it's a shipping crate. And you hear Billie Holiday's voice singing Strange Fruit from the inside. And he's a printmaker. He uses unconventional materials. He deals with language and how language fails. But I get goosebumps thinking about it, because this is the first time I'm like interacting with this work that is like in between print, sculpture, and it's talking about us. It's talking about the extent to which we go to attain freedom. It's very specific and like right what I wanted to like be thinking about. So I went back and I was like, let me learn how to build a crate. Let me get more comfortable using a table saw. So I figured out how to build a crate, thinking that modular way of making, but also thinking about being able to take up space and not take up space and move and be able to travel. These are a lot of things that I was thinking about personally as far as the histories I wanted to celebrate. And when you're thinking about printmaking in particular, you're thinking about a technology used to communicate to a larger public. And so I chose to find a way to highlight ways people of African descent have always been engaging in these print histories, whether or not they're celebrated in academia and if you think about how we've communicated with textiles and embedded language in textiles, that's clearly an example of using technology to speak to a larger public. So, long story short, being in Detroit, everybody's working with this Home Depot aesthetic, everybody's trying to make art and spending money, and I'm just like noticing all the scraps that people are tossing away, and this poetic thing started coming out about woods, and they're all of our skin tones, and it marks travel across continents, trade. I can talk about histories that far predate the slave trade, about how when we were trading with Indian cultures back. We can talk about women's work, we can talk about weaving and the contributions to like technology and how they invented computing. A lot of this started becoming about celebrating people that are trying or choosing to care for each other instead of responding to something. I think a big providing space to her for care. So thinking about translating that to a practice of healing on a daily basis and trying to piece together things instead of like remove to tell a larger story, I figured that wood was a much quicker avenue to be able to talk about all of our cultural hybridity, how we're all mutts and made up of all these stories put together. And proximity really tells the difference between who we see and who we don't see. So I love this idea of being able to get somebody to slow down and like investigate a pine that they're so desensitized to in a different context. And it maybe might translate to how we all see some people and don't see other people. And a lot of the material choices, I think, are rooted in that. They're very bodily. They are records, they're scars, there's a lot of language overlap when it comes to knots, and quilting knots and language and how we are able to pass on messages whether or not some people are looking. And I love that gesture of toiling away at something and having it be there, and whether you're ready or not, you can walk right past it if you want to, or you can sit down and be like, go down a wormhole. You know what I mean? But it's ready and it's patient and it's waiting for you. I think that kind of goes into some of the other prompts about the material. And yeah.
Can I just finish? I'm sorry about that. I was totally not expecting that, but
It's not the first time people have wept in this room.
I'm not a public weeper, so anyway, it just happened. But I already told Nava this the other day, but you know, when I was making the piece, so this piece that's in here is a remake, a reinterpretation of the piece that I made in 2011 during the residency. And so my schedule has been such that this was made over the last few weeks. And 14-hour days, we all know what that's like. And so I was, lashing together each of those joints on the metal net. And it just, a lot of the things that you just talked about, they were just like this history and how I'm grateful for craft and making and being able to communicate what I can't communicate well verbally through these materials, and what a gift that is, and thinking of inheritance and the importance of that. And like you were saying, craft is politic, and like these things are important, and heritage, legacy, tradition, but then also like moving them forward and using them in ways that do pose these critical questions that I think are ever important.
It's a safe space.
Yeah, I don't know, I'm still a little uncertain how to speak. I think I'm getting a little better about being able to speak in my work, but I'm relying on other people to help me speak about it and understand it in words, like this person right here. Yeah, I don't think I absorbed the question very well, but thank you to all of you for speaking, because I told her, let's just have a conversation around, because I'm sure we're going to spark stuff for each other, and it's a real honor to be in this show amongst you all, and really thank you for including me. But I'm still sort of new to like shifting from this functional wood guy to this art wood guy, and feels sort of new. So I know that I'm compelled and I'm searching. I still feel like I'm searching most of the time, but residency here gave me the first chance to begin to have some content in the work. So I just started, I had a hard time finding out an artistic voice with wood. I'd done that functional thing for so long that I just couldn't make the break, it all has to look like this, and it just like was sort of stuck in that, and I broke free here, and the work I made here was, this is what I'm searching for, and was completely satisfied with it. So, but it just is sort of this thing about gluing things together, gluing these little parts I needed to spend a lot of hours at it, and I still haven't left it behind. It's still my favorite thing to do. It's something about all those different kinds of woods that for me, you know, they're about diversity. They're about, there's just so much contained in each piece for me, and like, I can't leave pieces out. Like, there's too many pieces that need to be in there. They need to be together to make the picture make sense, I guess, maybe for me. So this piece, you know, I'm really, I mean, I'm here in Philadelphia. I grew up in Los Angeles. Like, we don't have history in Los Angeles like you have here. I mean, this is the bedrock, you know, for the birth of this country. It's in that historic way that we look at it, and all the buildings around here, and all the tours you take, and all of that. So I knew I had I was, you know, feeling it for 2 months, and I knew I wanted to really respond. And so all the different woods here in this piece are, you know, found on demolition sites here in the city, you know, tearing down these old buildings of wood that I don't have in LA. Some of it I don't know what it is. So for me, it needs all of those. Like, we all have to be in there. Like, all the stories we just heard have to be in there. And I'm still searching, you know, for what that all means, but it seems like the language is pretty strong about what it is and what's moving me. Yeah, I mean, the most recent little insight, as I was trying to just make notes about being here and being on this panel, I was just going back to my childhood, like, where was I born and what was going on?
Mm-hmm.
What was the politics I just missed, you know? And so then but the first thing that came up was I grew up in the suburbs of LA, where my house was situated was an orange orchard that they had just taken down to start building these homes, and across the street was still orange orchards that were eradicated soon after I was born. And I didn't really make the connection until the next day, like, oh my God, you get born with cutting down trees, fruit trees, and now the wood is telling me, you know, I want to go back to being a tree. It's asking me, you know, like, speak for that, like, reconnect me, you know. And so I'm like, wow, that's an interesting little connection there. Yeah.
I wanted to touch on this question of inheritance. So I'm going to throw all of this back to all of you. How are you dealing with this question of what you've inherited in your work? And it can be about the material itself, because as we were kind of tossing this question around as a staff, we were drawing connections between what you inherit genetically in terms of DNA, family traits, and the ways that trees grow, develop, seed, populate, and then connect with each other throughout their lifespan. So how are you dealing in your work or in your life here in this time with the question of inheritance?
Just a thought occurs to me, you know, I don't know, I think I inherited a certain degree of mental illness from my family. It's real. And it affected me my whole life. I just turned 70 and I spent like so much money on therapy, and it just wasn't helpful. Like, I wasn't strong enough now. I guess therapists just were like, what's wrong with you? Like, maybe you can't be helped. It's kind of the message. I got that message directly, actually. So inheritance also, you know, I remember hiking in Kings Canyon in Sequoia National Park, and in the forest you see trees, you know, that are just thriving. They're together, you know, they got everything they need. They're being nurtured. But then you see these other trees that are off in this really dry area where it's too much sun or something, and they don't thrive, you know. And it was just like, wow, I feel like that tree, you know. So I think this thing that I said about gluing the parts together, like the wood is helping heal you. I was childhood as a little kid, climbing trees for sure, but I got interested in making, like, nothing around me in my family, in my world was asking, was demonstrating anything about any of that. But I was, trying to get power tools when I was like 8 years old. Go to the library and learn how to make a bird feeder or something like that. But to go to a whole other direction, I listened to, we were in our cars in LA. LA is car city. And so I listened to, books on tape kind of stuff. And I got a hold of Glenn Adams's book. I think it was called The History of Craft Making. And I started listening to it, and it was like, it's all about Native Americans in this country in the beginning. And I was kind of like going, oh, I didn't see this coming, And I didn't get very far into that book, and in a way I'm glad, because I needed to stop right there, I think. And at some point, I'm looking forward to going back. And I just was in Seattle this summer, and we went to the Chihuly Museum, I guess. And if you walk in the first room, it's his collection of Native American works that inspired a lot of what his early stuff was. And then a picture of, I guess, Curtis's picture, and collected. And Curtis is in there, I think. All these pictures of Native American. So that was like huge for him. And it was really good to see that connection. And yeah, it's a journey, man. For me, it's just like about showing up. And the stuff that's coming as a result of just showing up and following those impulses, and then starting to believe in myself and have the freedom to keep at it. And got that here is really tough.
Wow. Yeah. Excuse my language, I'm interested in this real time, and it's like a universal, it's a universe setup. And the connection to all of these folks here in the panel, and it's my lived life in every way. And I don't want to reveal everything to myself because I know it's being recorded. But I will say this on heritage because it's heavy. Well, at least it's pressure, right? So, heritage, and what did I inherit? My father's side of the family. We're here. You're all woodsmen in Georgia. And someone escaped, right? And they escaped to the Seminole Nation. So my great-grandmother and my dad's side both folk was and split the family. Some folks stayed in Florida. The family that I don't know, that I feel that I'm trying to connect to. It's like a repeat, almost like a repeat for the last 20 years. And I'm processing, I'm sitting here, listening, and I'm trying to find them without having them. Right? So it's like the language I'm processing. It's amazing how art, heritage, time gets revealed at these moments, these public moments, and you get exposed. Everyone is exposed, but it's also the genius of someone selecting people to come together to have these conversations. It's taken to a whole nother level for me right now. And I'm thinking like, what's really happening in the grand scheme of things that we think that we know. And it's like these breadcrumbs, right? really scary. Right? Now I'm exposed, and I'm learning. Right? So I'm a babe in all this, right? Making options. But I know that inheritance, right? And it's in the blood, and I put blood and genetic matter in my material as like this person, right? So I can find myself in the future. I answered.
Yeah, so inheritance. I think about this a lot, and initially I wanted to talk about the word itself because where I source the word is important to me. It's coming from locations that are adjacent to these institutions that I'm trying to critique. But I think I want to take it to a personal level more and talk about the conflict of my ancestry, which is my grandparents came from Europe, came to Ellis Island and wound up in the South in Southern Appalachia. My father's side, one half did that, the other half was indigenous Cherokee in Southern Appalachia, North Carolina. And that history was hidden from me as a young person. I didn't know much about it. Like that side of the family went back about 2 generations. And it took me as an adult really researching for like 15 years to kind of figure out where my grandmother and her parents came from. And the idea of like this particular family tree sort of being like the direct conflict of colonialization and displacement and all these things that were sort of associated with it. That's what I think about a lot when I'm thinking about how these things sort of came to me. But also just this idea of like getting to nature. I grew up around trees. I grew up in nature. And I've been in New York for a quarter century, so very much not around nature. And I think that's part of my practice was a way to be able to start to get back to the land. And this idea of like soil and what does soil mean? I remember there was this series of sort of like philosophical books that came out about 10 years ago called Object Lessons, and a writer would just pick like one topic that was a noun, and they would write like a short book about it. And there was this one that was just called dirt, and it was just this sort of like pontification about like what dirt is, which is us, and everything else mixed together. The ground is all the nutrients that we need to be able to grow our food, where the things we use to build our buildings come from. So this idea of sort of like the most, atomic basic level of the material and sort of investigating everything that comes out of that led me to wood and how to deal with them.
Inheritance. So for me, I did come from a family that was involved with woodworking. My earliest memories are in a wood shop in Mexico. That was like my dad's free daycare for us. So it all, lens. But there was, growing up, my family had a lot of wooden sinks around the house. And to me, it was pretty magical and strange to think that at some point those saints were branches, and at some point in the carving process, this like spirit ghost entered the piece of wood, and now became a saint. Like it went from a tree to a saint. And so I grew up thinking about like what is that process? How do you learn that process? Who's involved? Why wood? Why saints? So when I think about like the sort of like how do you embed a story into a piece of wood or material, or what story is already in a material, and how do you bring it out forward? I think I have less of an answer, but more of a sort of curiosity towards that. Like how do you embed a spark of life into an object? How do you I also grew up thinking of like when you go to like an art space, why is there not like a booklet next to the work to explain you what you're looking at, or what it means, or what it's, you know, doing. But then you see words that do that without any words, right? Like there's some things that, like, when you translate it, I think we were here talking about translation, you know, it's actually like not in the benefit of the experience. And like I remember when I was learning English, there were a lot of things that I wanted to like say or do, and it was easier to do it like physically, you know, than like through word. I think that's just like one of the main things we can do. So when I think about like, you know, what was given to me and what's given forward through the field I'm in, a story that happened to me with like my making was that you know, as I made these objects and these stories that I think I embed into my work, one time a friend of mine who's not an artist, he doesn't go to art shows, he doesn't really, you know, read much of what I read, you know, we have very different lives. And he once told me, he's like, man, like, I don't know why people like look at art, I don't know why people like are so like, you know, there's such high price and there's like museums for these things or whatnot. But when I see you care so much about what you do, it makes me want to care about what I do. And for me, that was just like, you know, there's something there that, you know, especially in a place with so much like attention to detail as all the subjects, and like so much like giving of oneself to an object. I think there's something there that's like in place that is like inherited forward, you know, and you might not even know who's it for, but it's like this capsule of like attention and care that like hopefully in the future they're like, you know, can speak or do rather, you know, so that's kind of where, you know, besides my stories of my work, there's like that side too that I hope these things are kind of like reminders of care.
I think I've already talked about inheritance, except now I know that we're cousins.
I think for me, inheritance is always a big part of my thinking about my practice. I think a lot of times I consider my practice very collaborative, even if I'm in the studio by myself. When it comes to like muscle memory and why I feel comfortable making certain decisions in the studio or laboring over certain things for certain hours. I know it's not necessarily me just making those decisions with there's parts of it that I don't fully understand, but I'm just like enjoying collaborating in that moment with fellas playing, you know what I mean? Or I'm thinking of this ancestor and I think part of that has to do with also being fortunate to grow up in Ghana and learning that, like, I don't know how to explain it, but there's this sense that kids, like, we just never feel like we're alone. Even if we're alone, there's always somebody watching. You can't get away with anything. Like, there's always somebody watching. And it's like, you're never really alone. And I was saying that because another part of the inheritance that I think about in my studio practice daily was the experience I had at the AUC, learning from a lot of these other Black artists who, for a long time in this country, never really had places to show their work or were celebrated other than in other HBCUs. This is why places like Clark Atlanta has like incredible archives of the most amazing Black artists, because these are some of the few places they could travel and teach each other. And there is this culture in a lot of HBCUs where you will learn of all these incredible people, Elizabeth Caplet's coming through and teaching these courses, and they'll have an example right there, and you like see this example of care that these people are passing on to the students. And it's like, these are gods to some of the students, but then they're like just people, right? And when you're in the studio, you're thinking about them, and like, they're like, you don't have the money, stop coming up with excuses. You better use ketchup if you need red. You know what I mean? Figure it out, work with less. Like, when you're problem solving in the studio, you're thinking about these people every day also. So there is that element of inheritance also that I have to acknowledge, that like, there were a lot of people that paid a lot of care and had a lot of patience with me. And wood was also another way of like table saw trying to do like miters at like 1/16 of an inch, like I'm upset. I need to just sit here. There's also the other aspect historically of the fact that a lot of us that came here because we were craft people. We came here because we knew how to work the soil. We knew how to build chickens. We knew how to mold or work with steel. And I love those moments where I'm going through cities like this and I see urban roofing that has the dinker symbol, that heart shape, and I know what it means because I understand the dinker symbols, but everybody else can just walk right past it. And I know like somebody maybe like 200 years ago just left that for me just to be like, you're home, you're okay. You know what I mean? So it's like a daily thing. But the act or the privilege of being able to be in a space like this where you can celebrate people that are all sharing that very quiet, it feels very lonely sometimes, but it's like we do this for each other, to be in community, to think of each other, to remember each other. And I've always tried to think of those artists I grew up seeing in Ghana that nobody will ever know their names. Their studio practices are like crazy. So if I have the opportunity to do something, I better bring it. You know what I mean? There's that accountability and responsibility that comes with that. And I think that also goes into that like, conversation of inheriting something. If you have the time to do this, you better bring it. You know what I mean? There's also this term, it's a Yoruba term called ashe, and it means the spirit or the essence of the thing. As a creator, as a maker, we can only be responsible for our relationship with this material while we have it. But when we're done with it, we can't dictate how you're going to react to it. That's the ashe of the piece. So we grew up with a lot of artworks that like the intention was for you to have coffee with it and spend months with it. You know what I mean? And have that conversation with a piece of work where it grows with you and changes you over time. You can't just walk up to it and be like, I get it. Maybe you think you can. You lie to yourself. But like, you know, like it's part of that. Like you're thinking about all these things at the same time, which goes back to you talking about like being the present, the past, and the future at all the same time. So these are very like, I think there are a lot of people that really understand that to the core. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking us to this subject of care. That was something that I wanted us to be able to touch on, but you went there again, which makes a lot of sense actually, and something that's, you know, in terms of who this organization is and how this organization ended up here is, you know, against the backdrop of over 350 years of furniture production and thinking about wood, furniture, and capital. And care gets left out of that conversation. So through your work, you're bringing us back to that and helping us understand how important it is in terms of sharing your stories and building an inheritance for the United States in this time. So thank you so much for doing that. I wanted to open it up to everyone here if you have questions for our panelists. Now is the time. No pressure. Well, okay. So thank you again. Thank you for sharing so beautifully your work with us and your words and experiences. And look forward to more programming like this throughout the run of the exhibition, which closes on February 15th. So you have lots of time to contemplate inheritance and wood and the potential that those two things